Live. Welcome to Daydreams, Mr. Gavin. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, Dylan. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Like I said, man,
It's a pleasure.
it's the whole matchmaker situation. My wife always finds that to be a weird name. I find it to be a weird name for that podcast site, but it's honestly been a great resource. I mean, I found a lot of interesting people. I've met a lot of cool people with some interesting stories to tell. And while we're on that topic, you have an interesting story of your own, right?
I do. It's quite deep and quite intricate.
Yeah.
uh,
I know we were kind of chit chatting a little bit about it, but I mean, go ahead, tell me about yourself.
so my story kind of started with my mum. My mum was brought up in a convent over in Ireland back in 1953, and due to that, she obviously didn't know her biological parents, so she was a foundling. So she was handed into a church in a place called Galway, to the priests and the nuns to be looked after in the convents. There was a lot of mother and baby homes
Right.
in Ireland at the time, so it was that was kind of where all the young babies went without their mothers, or with their mothers, and then they gave birth to the children, and then their mums, sort of handed them up for adoption and stuff. So
Hmm.
it was pretty tough times to grow up in somewhere like that,
Right.
and obviously not to grow up with any parents, and not to know any parents. That's it's quite tough. So she had a tough time growing up. So she did. And then from there, she was moved to a foster family, which is kind of where it all went a bit south. They never really adopted her or fostered her because they couldn't provide the paperwork to the convents, which is a bit weird. So she was with them for ooh, 6 or 7 years, I'd say, and they were brutal, like very brutal.
How
She
old
was
was she
almost
when she went to the foster?
5 or 6, I'd say, something around there.
Wow, so she
And
was really young.
yeah, yeah, really young. And she remembers there was a time where she was supposed to go on a plane, and she was meant to be taken on a plane to America,
Hmm.
and then she was taken off the plane and then diverted to this foster family over the other side of Ireland, where I mean, well, she used to be raped on a weekly basis by the foster father,
Oh my
like on a
goodness.
weekly basis. And if she ever sort of opened her mouth or voiced her opinion to the foster mother would beat her. Till such stage, there was one day where she opened her mouth a bit too much, and she burnt her in the leg with a hot poker. And my mum still has that hole in her leg now, from where she burnt her in the leg with a hot poker. And she had to hide that, obviously, from the hospitals and the services and stuff like that, and pretty much work on it on her own. So yeah, it was real tough.
How long was she with this foster family?
Ooh, 8 years, I think, 7 or 8 years, until someone noticed that she shouldn't have been with them.
Right.
It was sort of she was spoken to someone in the village. I mean, you can imagine the place. I'd try and paint a picture for you. It's remote island. There's nothing. They had no tellies, no newspaper. One newspaper a week, sort of thing. And
Right.
everyone. There weren't many cars. Most people went around on a bike or a donkey or a horse or whatever. And so, like, very remote, out in the middle of nowhere. There's like mountains up the back here. There's all stone walls all the way around, real picturesque sort of countryside, but out in the middle of nowhere. So any sort of abuse that she endured from them, it was sort of, there was no one around to see it, because they're out in the middle of nowhere. So she used to basically get treated like a slave on the farm, as opposed to being looked after and brought up like a normal child should do. You
What
know.
year was this? I mean, I don't. Not that
Well,
it's super relevant, but I'm just curious.
1953. So yeah,
1953.
67 years ago.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, it was really tough for her growing up, and then she then managed to get away from him when she was about 16. She got away when she was 12, but they used to go back for visits and stuff, at holidays, which I thought was bizarre, for everything that they done to her, and then they used to send her back there on holiday visits. It was odd.
You know, there is
Uh,
a phenomenon in psychology. It's like I wouldn't consider that to be like Stockholm syndrome, where it's like you're attracted to your stalker or anything like that. But there is like um, a psychological phenomenon where you're, you know, I guess it's not guilty, but you're, you know, you want to be present even in front of your abusers. It's very strange.
well, funny enough, even I met the foster mother at my age.
Uh
Mum,
huh.
we went over there. So because my mum never had any family, she had never had that biological bond to anyone or anything. She never had aunties, uncles, nothing. Nans, granddads, nothing she had. So that was the closest thing to a mother she knew.
Right.
So she would take me back there, and we'd visit them probably, I don't know, every 5 years. But the foster father wasn't there because he'd passed. But I mean, they were wicked to her. I mean, wicked. I mean, the priest turned up one year to go and see her, and they hid her in a trunk in the kitchen and sat on the trunk and told the priest, she's gone away now to play with the children now, and she wouldn't. She was sat in the trunk underneath her, while the priest was there talking to
What?
her. Yeah. And because obviously and that was the time when she had this hole in her leg, or this cyst in her leg from where she burnt her with a hot poker. So she didn't want them seeing that, So it was kind of shut her in a box and kill it. And she said to her, she said that if you open your mouth, she said they'll be strangling you, like. So she threatened her, to say, keep your mouth shut inside in this box, And she was probably 8, 9 years old at the time. So yeah, you can imagine. It's a real crazy story. It should be in a book or a film somewhere. Um,
Absolutely. And we have Lex joining in. She's just throwing out hearts of love. Hey Lex, how you doing? But how did this affect you growing up? Like, you know, I
well,
can only imagine the amount of trauma that was passed down. I mean, how did
yeah.
you inherit all this?
Well, I put my mum to bed for 30 years crying for her mother every weekend without fail.
Wow.
So, and I didn't realize how much it had affected me until I had my own children, until I got older,
Hmm.
and then when you have your own kids and you sort of reflect back on your own upbringing, and think, well, what did I do when I was that age? And what was I doing when I was that age? And it makes you reflect on your own childhood. And unfortunately, inadvertently, my mum kind of, like, there were certain times where she'd sort of answer me or tell me off in the same way that the foster parents would. Not that she ever abused me or raped me. My mum was great. My mum's amazing. For what she went through and what she did for me was just, I'm so grateful for what she went through, or I'm so grateful for what she did for me after what she went through.
Absolutely.
But because she was resonating or resembling or mirroring the same way she would have been, like, spoken to. I get you, don't be doing that. So, basically. So, it was kind of like sometimes that would mirror out in her, the way she used to speak to me sometimes. So it was quite tough. I mean, my mum had 3 failed marriages, so I had obviously 2 or 3 different stepdads, which
Hmm.
was, that was pretty tough as well, because my dad left when I was 8 months old. So it was just me and my mum, and that was it. There was no one else around. There's no biological family, no aunties, no uncles, no cousins, nans, granddads, nothing.
How
So
old was your
yeah,
mom when she had you?
uh, 20. I'm going to say 2021, something like that. Um, and yeah, she obviously moved over to England before that. I think she came over to England in 1971 or something.
Okay. And what was it like? I know you said that your father left when you were like when you were 8 months old. What was it like growing up without a father? And that situation, you know, having the trauma passed down.
Yeah, it was different. I don't quite know any other way of easy way of saying it. It was different, you know. I mean, I obviously had different stepdads, so some of them were quite like drunks, you know, and abusive and violent, you know. Because I think it was kind of strange because where my mum had grown up with that, she was kind of so used to that kind of environment, you know. So
Right.
she ended up with guys that were kind of like abusive and violent, you know. So there'd be a lot of, you know, verbal abuse and physical abuse and, you know, the whatnot, and a lot of drinking, a lot of alcohol involved, you
Hmm.
know. So yeah, it was tough to deal with growing up as a kid, you know. But like I say, it didn't hit me until I had my own children and grew up myself, you know. And then you start reflecting on your own childhood more. So I think when you've had your own children, you know, and that's when the bombshell hit. That's when the rabbit hole took me down, and I couldn't get back out of it. You know, it was
Hmm.
that was dark times. It was dark times.
Lex is saying that story is insane and so sad. I can
Yeah,
relate at least to the father aspect. My father actually committed suicide when I was 4 years old. So going through that and being raised without a father and having a mother that, you know, acted as both the father and the mother figure was definitely an interesting dynamic. You know, you definitely have a lot more respect for mothers that are single mothers that are really trying to just do their best to raise their kids. And I love my mom to death. So um,
yeah,
like you said, there's a lot of past history and past trauma in the way that she was raised, but she did a particularly good job not passing that down to me. So
yeah.
I've always admired mothers that can. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job at all, especially when you're dealing with your own traumas and your own insecurities and your own, you know, abuse, and reflecting back on that and how do you want to push forward. You know, you got to be careful not to project. So I highly respect your story and your mom, particularly in this situation. Yeah. So tell me about, so you've grown up, you had your own kids. Tell me how you've noticed a little bit of the reflecting behavior that was kind of I guess projected onto you.
Well, it was kind of weird actually because I when I had a breakdown, I had a breakdown now about a year ago, and it all kind of started when I was having nightmares. I gave up smoking, ironically, and I gave up when I gave up smoking. I don't know if you've ever heard this. It's quite a common thing. When you give up smoking, you tend to have these vivid dreams and nightmares. It's really weird. Um,
Smoking cigarettes or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, just giving up smoking. Yeah,
Mm.
and so you then withdrawals of the nicotine, you start having nightmares. I mean, I did anyway. I don't know how true it is for everyone else, but that's what I got. And what happened was is because I'd started analysing a lot of my past, I started having nightmares. So I'll go back to where my mum was where my mum was she was on her own. There was just me and my mum, so she obviously had to work when I was younger, when my dad after my dad left. So I had to have a lot of babysitters, and consequently, because I've had these babysitters, mum wasn't always around because the babysitters were there, you know. So I, as a child, and mum being lonely and not having that support network, I was abused as a child by these babysitters, by two of these babysitters, incidentally. One when I was about 5, and one when I was about 8. Two, like one was a male, one was a female, two different people, two different time. And because I sort of buried it, if you like, I did. I done what's kind of called Tony Robbins liked to call it emotional stacking.
Hmm.
Um, so I did that for best part of 35 years until I started having these nightmares. So the my first counsellor I ever spoke to called it extended PTSD. Usually PTSD comes on in the first 3 to 5 years or 2 to 3 years or something Mine was 35 years of suppressed emotions because I always had to be strong in a way for my mum, because my mum was so traumatized and shocked by her childhood and not knowing her biological mother or biological father. So she was always upset by that and traumatized by that. So every weekend I'd have to put my mum to bed. So I wasn't able to
Deal with your
um,
own.
yeah, and express my own emotions because I had to sort of keep it locked up. So yeah, and then 35 years later, I start having these nightmares, and then these nightmares start becoming in my peripheral vision, and then there were just like flashbacks of the past in the daytime and everything. It was horrific, and that put me on a massive downhill spiral. Luckily, I've got my wife here for support, and she's just amazing. She's done with me, and she's been such a great rock to me and supported me in every way that she can. And if it wasn't like that, I mean, when I was a kid, in my teens and stuff, I was heavily abusive of drugs. Like I used to go mad, drugs and drink every weekend. That was my forte, just to break away from all the real stuff that was going on. Just that separation, like to not have to think about all of that. So rather than deal with it, I just buried it back and just use drugs and alcohol to suppress them feelings and then thoughts, and buried that for years and years and years, and until, like I say, such time I decided, I woke up one morning and it had all hit me in one hit. It was like a giant wave of fog, and it put me on my arse like a steam train for the best part of 6 months.
Did you ever
Uh,
become depressed or suicidal during this period?
I had suicidal thoughts. Don't get me wrong, but my head, I was able to. I thought to myself, I've done 35 years of this, and I've managed to get my head out of it every time, so I don't need to go down that route. And I'm here for my wife and my children. I couldn't do that to my wife and my children and my mum, or just I couldn't do it. It's not my sort of code, if you like. I just wouldn't be able to go through with it. But
Right.
I think if when you're in that mindset, you think of all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Your mind goes, but you're kind of like, how can I say? It's like being in a fog of nothing. You just sort of walk round and round in circles, and you can just, yeah, your mind runs away with you. Oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. No one likes me. This and anxiety just it's like fireworks going off in your brain.
Right. It's actually really interesting that you say that. My mom is in the chat actually. Ironically, we were just talking about you, mom. The only way one can heal by in Christ, and then she says, "Thank you for speaking about mental health." Uh, it's really interesting whenever the talk about depression and anxiety come up because I've dealt with my own issues, growing up and 27 years of existence. You see a decent amount. Obviously, you haven't seen everything, but I've been through that emotional state. I've been through that dark period where anxiety and the thoughts of worthlessness and helplessness kind of take over, and you're like, am I good enough? But one thing that's always caught my attention every time I've been through that is the fact that it's so attractive. Now that may be very controversial to say, but it's almost as though when you're in it, it's seductive. It's very
Mm.
seductive to be in those states, and your state of mind is just, it gravitates there when you're
Give me more. Give me more.
yeah, let me
Yeah.
let me keep thinking about this. Let me keep thinking about all the ways that I'm not good enough. Why am I not good enough? Am I not good enough for this relationship? Am I not good enough to meet this criteria, this job? It's so seductive, and no matter what I did, I didn't. The weird part was I knew I was in this state, and I did not want to be happy. It was so weird. It was so seductive to the point to where I just said, screw it. I don't want to be like this anymore. Like I actually have to try. Like even if I don't want to go out and like have fun or want to be happy or do something that would make me happy, like I got to force myself to do it. I literally have to, because again, it's so like any emotion, like anger, for example. Anger is very seductive. When you're in a heated argument with, your significant other, or you're in a heated argument with anybody, there's the tendency to want to say that one last thing that will just antagonize and get the last word. It's like you're being seduced to say it. Like anger is very seductive, and I think that depression and those sorts of emotion, that realm, is seductive as well. It's always interesting to think about that. Any thoughts? Have you experienced any of that?
Lots of it.
Yeah.
Almost every word you said. Yeah, I mean, in my younger days, anger was always the first option, because it was the easier option, and it was. I suppose, for me growing up. I mean, I grew up in the '90s, and it was very cliche for men to talk about anything like that. I mean, even now, I mean, the reason why I do what I do is to sort of like inspire men to tell their story, because the biggest problem is men don't talk. They won't talk about emotions. It's not the manly thing to do, and it's really hard as well to express your emotions when there's sexual and physical mental abuse that's involved.
Right.
It's like, you've got to, there's like a pride thing, or yeah, like a pride thing that gets in the way. You when you go down the pub and have a drink with your mates, you don't you don't turn around and start talking about sexual abuse. You talk about the football and this and that and da 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 da. And it wouldn't be like subject of topic of conversation, would it? To be talking about that kind of stuff with your mates, so everyone avoids it, really. It's like it's a tough thing to admit and start talking and open up.
Do you think that there's a cultural shift that's happening right now to like push people more to talk about these sorts of things?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think now we're seeing that, obviously, with everything that's been going on over the last 2 years, it's made people a bit more aware of men's mental health, and it's actually a thing, and it does exist. Men can be upset. I mean, I found that crying was just amazing. That was like, when I started, I hadn't cried for 30 years, because I'd built up a resilience to it, of to not showing my emotions and not letting anyone know who I really was. In a way, it's kind of like a lost identity. Like you put on an identity, or a mask to the outside world, and then really what you're concealing inside is a lot deeper and darker, but you can't share it. You feel like you can't share it because people might think, oh, he's gone through this, or he's done this, or whatever, and you kind of feel ashamed, in a way, if you like, if that's a better way of putting it. You kind of feel ashamed about talking about it and opening it up. And I think now, with everything that's been going on, it's becoming a bit more normal, if you like. Well, I'd like to think it is becoming a bit more normal, and it's allowing more men to speak up and share their emotions, or any trauma or abuse or anything they've been through, and just let it off. Because if you're holding that, it will wear you down. It will just beat you to the core. Like, it's like, I like to imagine it as if you've got like a rucksack on your back, and it's full of stones, and every stone is an emotion. And you can imagine, the more stones you put in, the heavier the backpack gets, and before you know it, you're sort of down here with all your, and you need to lift that weight off and get them emotions out, because you'll just be carrying that big bag of emotions on your back, and it eventually gets very painful. I
I'm
mean, I had serious that problem.
I'm in agreement with you. I think it's definitely becoming more popularized to talk about these sorts of things, particularly with men. Not the challenge that I face, and I think a lot of people face, is the difficulty of expressing it I think we want to talk about it. It's just how we express it. Like for me, if something's bothering me or there's something that happens um, that's weighing me down, I have a bad habit of shutting off and trying to think and process through it first before I talk about it. Like I like to sit and try everything I can to figure out the words, what's making me upset, what's making me, feel this type of way before I bring it to anybody. I've always felt as though if I bring it to somebody too soon, they'll either not know what I'm talking about or just push it aside and tell me, "Oh, that's not a big deal." Because oh my gosh, I really hate it when people try to give me advice. Like when people try to tell me how I should be feeling. Like I know what I need to do, dude. Like I know I shouldn't be feeling this way, but there's nothing I can do. I'm an emotional human being. I don't want to feel this way. That's why I try to like sit down, process it out, try to be as articulate with the idea and the feeling as possible before I explain it to somebody. So that way, when I explain it to them, they're not like, "Oh, well, that's just this, you shouldn't be feeling like that." Or, they're completely, that's the other thing. If I have a problem with somebody and like something that someone else did to me, upset me, I don't want when I tell somebody or talk about it to just tell me I'm right either. Like I hate that. I like to be told the truth 100% of the time. Even if it's not, the brightest truth, I definitely want to hear the truth. And there are times when I feel like people are not being genuine with me on topics that I really need to hear, that kind of shut down, which I think is why I shut down in the first place, which is why I don't talk about it at all until I've emotionally processed it, and then I can clearly and articulately explain what my issue is. So it's probably not the best habit, but something I do.
Cool. I mean, it took me 35 years to come out and say anything about any of it. I mean, I've got friends that I've been with, friends with 25 years. Even my mum and dad, didn't know, or my stepdad rather. Even they didn't know. No one knew. No one knew, literally until about a year ago. And I'd been holding that, weighing that down. All my mum's trauma, my stuff that I went through, been holding on to that for 35 years. So you can imagine I'm probably not the only male that has kept stories in for many years, and not had the courage to speak up and say, this is what's happened and this is how I feel. And I mean, I know lots of guys, but I used to be in the construction industry, and a lot of guys, they finish work straight in the pub. They're in the pub all night. They don't want to go home because they don't want to talk to their missus. They're miserable because they haven't got no money. They're miserable because they don't like their job. They're miserable because they've held on to emotions and not spoke about anything, and kept everything and just building it up and building it up. I mean, another way I like to put it is from a early age, sort of between sort of 0 and 7, or birth and 7 rather, you sort of build a foundation of what you sort of perceive to the world, what you perceive of the world. And then if you have any sort of bad traumatic times or emotions or anything, you kind of build blocks up, and obviously the bigger the emotions, the bigger the trauma, the bigger the abuse, the bigger the blocks are, and then you just build the blocks up, and then before you know it, you've got a fortress around you,
Oh yeah.
and you're so blocked and cold and resilient to anything, and you just, everything's blocked. So no one, I always say, you tend to have a sense of false identity. You're not, like I say with the mask. You cover all your emotions up, and you kind of sort of like mold yourself into what you think the world should perceive you by.
Yeah.
So rather than being yourself and being upfront all the time, you tend to hide that and bottle it up and change your kind of ways to fit in with the social environment. That's why I like to say about the the identity thing, because you know, me and my mum grew up with no biological family. We didn't know where we're from. We didn't know who we are. We don't know none of our ancestral background, nothing, you know. So it was, it's been a rough ride, put it that way.
We have
rough ride.
We have a couple people joining in saying, hello, what's up, Del? And then Randall, hey, a long time no see, buddy. How you doing? You know, what you mentioned actually with the masks, I think there's a Japanese proverb that says something like, we wear 3 masks. The one you wear in front of your acquaintances, like your peers, the one you wear with your close family and friends, and then the one you wear with your creator, like when you're completely by yourselves. And just to say that there's different versions of you that identify with different aspects. And there's actually a sector of psychology where there's a concept called your true self versus your ideal self. And it's where we line up on the scale with, you know, the 3 masks that we wear versus our ideal self, you know, that depicts what sort of psychological traumas or issues that might arise from those states. So there's a lot of foundation in psychology, and I truly believe everybody should have some basic knowledge of psychology, you know, before getting out of high school or something, before entering, you know, the world. That's to say that I think that it really helps people understand trauma, and it really helps people understand how to handle those things and how to process those things. But what you were saying about the 3 masks, I think, is incredibly applicable to this situation, because you don't want to come out and say, you know, I've had all these traumas. There's that mask that you want to be perceived as this strong, cool, masculine man that doesn't have any issues. You know, you're working your job, but that's not what you feel on the inside. It's not aligned with your ideal self. It's not aligned to your true self. So there's a lot of issues that come into play which would cause behavioral what's the word, neuroticisms, which would in turn, you know, people get to become bipolar. People, it's not to say that this is the root cause of it, but, you know, it's just trying to highlight a point. People become bipolar, or people become narcissistic. So it's where these traumas, these masks, and your ideal self and true self all align, that sort of depict the behaviors that you present to the outward world, which is really interesting in my opinion. I think it's a true concept that I think we're kind of touching on here. Have you had any?
Yeah, very much.
Go ahead.
Go on. Say what you was going to throw a question in then.
Oh, I just was wondering if you had any experience with any of that. I mean, you know, fighting off some of these behaviors that would be outwardly explicit, I guess.
Oh, for sure. You know, I mean, I've been told many of times that I talk too much.
No, you're talking the perfect amount tonight.
So it's kind of like, that's why I sort of wanted to aim for the podcast. You know, I thought, do I do blogging? And I was, I'm not very good at typing or spelling, and I'm not very good at punctuation. And you know, do I do YouTube videos? And I thought, you know what, I'm just better at talking. So, you know, hence the podcast thing. That's it. My forte is talking. I must have got it from my ancestors, I believe. You know, but yeah. Sorry, I've forgotten the question.
I was wondering if you had any sort of behaviors that you had fought off, you know, trying to mash up your ideal self and everything.
Yeah, so the talking, you know, so basically I'd be overexcitable or just talk far too much, and no need to talk that much, you know, just to avoid anyone asking the questions, you know, just like sort of be sort of a different version of myself, like you say, like your true self and your identity self, or, you know, your true self and your ideal self. You kind of like put on a persona to avoid people asking you them questions, so you wouldn't have to talk about them issues, you know. And then if anyone did talk about their issues, you kind of like brush it off, or you know, leave the room or go somewhere else. You know, I'd always avoid it. I'd always avoid it, but not consciously. It was always like subconsciously I'd avoid it, so I didn't have to go there. You know, and it, like I say, that it was only a year ago that I started really delving into it and started dealing with it and started telling myself that you can't be like this no more. You know, things have got to change. Things have got to change drastically. You know, it just wasn't good. It just wasn't good.
What's your keep going? Sorry.
And 5 bottles of whiskey up on the side didn't help either. So you know, that's always a it's always a great feat on its own to avoid the alcohol. That's a major success on its own, is to say no to the alcohol.
Absolutely. Have you had to go through like any sort of mental training or mental adjustment, like a state of mind adjustment? What's that been like?
Oh yeah, loads of it.
Hmm.
It was really hard, really hard to start with. It was really hard because I'd sort of never believed in it. Really, I was like, it's all codswallop, you know. It does like that ain't going to help you, you know. And if anyone ever came to me and said, "Oh, I'm a bit down, I'm a bit like depressed, I'm a bit upset with this," and that, I'd be like, "Oh, just don't worry about it, mate. Yeah, just sort yourself out. Have a whiskey, you'll be fine. Let's carry on," you know. So I sort of always avoided the conversation with anyone if they said they was upset as well, you know. So it kind of made me sort of more sort of reserved in a way, you know.
So
Um,
so has that so I guess what I'm trying to ask is your mental state like you know how have you been on Instagram or anything like that, like Facebook, where it's like they'll post like inspirational quotes like it's your state of mind that controls your reality and you need to like focus on your state of mind that controls it. Like have you shifted like your perspective? Like what happened to make you I guess challenge where you were to where you are now?
a Tony Robbins documentary, ironically enough,
Really?
it was.
So it's funny that we bring that up.
Yeah, it was. There was an episode. I can't remember which one it was now, and it was one of his my Rob Mastery Madness, I think it's called, or something like that. And he was chatting to this girl, and that's where the emotional stacking came from, you know. And I was listening to this story of this girl, and she'd been abused as a child, and she had buried it for years, and she just sort of like she became like agreeable to everyone and everything, you know. She like a people person, people pleaser, you know, and I done a lot of that. So I resonated with what she was saying 100%. And yeah, and it was the way he said, what you've been doing is about the emotional stacking. And then all of a sudden it just hit me, bang. And I was like, wow, that's what I've been doing. You know, this is the key to why I've been like I have been, why I've been avoiding all this stuff. So I then had to learn how to talk to myself and how to. I mean, I used to talk to myself all the time because you usually got a better answer if you talk to yourself, don't you? You know, but I had to reteach myself how to rethink, you know, and I'd never like sort of thought about thinking about my thoughts. It was really hard to think about my thoughts, you know, and to try and think about every thought you have throughout the day, like it's near on impossible. So
Yeah.
you just have to like plug them, program them positive words into your head constantly, you know. I mean, I went out and watched The Secret. I bought the book, I bought the other book, I bought this book, I bought that book. You know, Seven Habits of Highly Influential People, you know, all sorts of books and audio books, mountains and mountains of YouTube videos, lots of walking, lots and lots of walking. And yeah, just kept telling myself, like, come on, we got to get out of this now. We got to get out of this, you know. And I went and had a load of counselling. I'd probably done, I don't know, 10 months of counselling, therapy, therapeutic therapy, sound therapy, CBT, all sorts, you know, NLP. I'm actually an NLP practitioner. 12
Oh,
years
really?
ago, yeah, 12 years ago, I did an NLP course, and it was to help me with my street drumming. I used to do street drumming workshops, and I used to use NLP mixed in with the street drumming workshops. It sounds ironic and odd, I know,
Oh, that's
but
awesome.
it worked. But I did the NLP then, but it was funny because when I faced the challenges of having to deal with my abuse and my trauma, I wouldn't open that door because you do exercises where you've got like 7 doors, or 6 doors, and one would be relationships, one would be wealth, one would be health, the other door would be physiology, like your mental health and stuff like that, and then the other door was something else. And I couldn't open half of them doors. Like I couldn't even go there, couldn't even open them. But I didn't realize that until 12 years later when I had my breakdown. And then I knew that, and it kind of bounced me back 12 years. And it was really strange after that, because there was a time when I was doing all the NLP stuff, and I was doing a lot of networking groups. I was going to seminars, workshops, such of the like. And I had like a little network of people that I used to communicate with. And it was really weird because 12 years later, when I had my breakdown and things started to make sense, and then I switched my thoughts and was like, right, I've got to be on it now. I've got to get out of this rabbit hole. This fogginess is not serving me no more. And I need to be more fulfilled with my life and step up. I've got a wife and 3 children that I need to look after. Got to get it together. And some of these people started coming back into my life from 12 years ago, just appeared. Like one of them, I was walking down the street and I bumped into a person that I was talking to 12 years ago. So it was like it came round full circle.
Wow.
And it was bizarre. It was really, really bizarre. It just all come out of nowhere. Like these people just kept appearing, and then I was getting messages and stuff from Facebook and things like that. It was really nice to see that you've decided to tell your story and open it up and realize what was holding you back, and it was just a breath of fresh air, and like I say, with the bag on the back, it was like, with all the stones and the emotions weighing you down, it was like someone just took like 100 kilos off of my back when I started speaking about my childhood and my abuse and my things that had upset me and the emotions over the years. And it was just literally the whole weight just gone. And that was the pinnacle for me. That was like the turning point. I was like, all my back pain's gone, all my neck pain's gone, and it all sort of happened in the space of a month. It was amazing. It was amazing. And I was in real dodgy guts as well, because when it first hit me, it was stirring my guts up really, really bad. Like I was having real trouble with my guts, and I couldn't go to the toilet properly. Anything I was eating just didn't want to stay there. It was a nightmare. And once the reality of, hang on, Gav, you need to change your thoughts and start thinking healthily and start thinking positively and looking after yourself, and go for a ride on your bike, go for a walk or go for a run and enjoy the beach. I mean, I've got a beach like 10-minute walk down the road, and I'd be lucky if I went there once a year, and it's like, now I go down there every sort of 2-3 days, I walk up and down. It's amazing. And it's just, what I do now is instead of the rocks being on my back and I sit on the beach, I'll pick up the stones and lob the stones into the sea. So any emotions that I get, I'll just throw them away, and if I've had a shitty week, I'll just sit on the beach and throw the stones, get rid of the emotions, and they're gone. Rather than stacking them and keeping them for 35 years, I have them for a couple of hours and then they're gone. And they don't hit me as hard as they used to now. Well, not the stones, but the emotions. I throw the stone.
People tend to neglect people's mental state in the response to physiological or like behaviors. So like you were saying, you had a hard time going to the bathroom, but it was, not until you shifted your mental state that you realized any sort of improvement. It's like most people don't consider that as a possibility, like for what's condemning their health. It's like, well, yeah, it sort of makes sense when you think about it from hormonal standpoint, if you have high levels of stress, cortisone is going to be secreted through your system, and that affects literally every organ in your body. Gives you high blood pressure, difficult time reducing insulin levels. You don't think as straight. I think there was a study done, like, had bills you had to pay, and they give you a test, and stressed about bills, then your IQ drops like a full 10 points. Like, that's a huge impact. Like, people neglect the responses that your body's physical health has in response to your brain's mental state. So there's actually another sector of psychology that's, highlighted to, try to shift people's mental state to a positive mental state. It's called humanistic psychology, because it does really affect your bodily functions. You have higher heart rates when you're stressed out and you have cortisone levels. I mean, could you imagine, everybody gets adrenaline if they saw like a bear or some life-threatening event happened, and that's meant to spark your body into fight or flight mode. You're supposed to be able to, either run like marathons at that point because you're trying to get away, your body's just in survival mode. Well, we've evolved as human beings to still keep those systems, but our brains aren't very sophisticated in differentiating between a bear attacking us and life stresses like paying bills or traumas that happened in the past. So our brains aren't actually that sophisticated to be able to differentiate between that. So imagine the childhood traumas that you mentioned, all stacking up on your back, or poverty, people living in poverty, having loved ones perish nonstop, not having the support system there. Imagine having all of that and then adding on top of that, everything else that someone has to deal with. Of course they're going to have health problems, physical health problems. People don't seem to understand that. It boggles my mind how people sort of neglect that. Have you heard? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. I was just agreeing with you. You carry on.
Have you read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life?
Not all of it. I'm not a great reader, to be honest. I tend to read audio books a lot better.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I listen to the whole thing audio. It's a great book. It's
amazing.
It's directed towards men, and it's directed towards his main message is stand up straight with your shoulders back like a lobster. In that book, it's like the first chapter, but it's a lot of great life advice. It's a lot of great material directed for men, and I read the whole thing front to back. And you said you have read a little bit of it.
Half of it. I mean, I listened to Tony Robbins, Les Brown, Zig Ziglar. He's old school.
Zig Ziglar, yeah. He's on my workout playlist, actually.
Oh, wow.
Got to make sure you stay motivated through the sets. You got to have someone tell you to go the extra mile, lift that one more set. So
yeah. But I mean, I never used to. I just listen to music, and I never I've just watched movies and stuff. I never ever listened to anything positive. I never listened to positive affirmations. I didn't even know what The Secret was, and now that's all I listen to. That's all I listen to is positive affirmations, very good motivational speakers, inspiring stories, and that's literally I just flood my brain with it now. It's just relentless, and it becomes an addiction. It's quite funny because in my sort of early years, I used to be addicted to drugs, and now I'm addicted to positivity. It's a very big change, but it's a very good change. It's a nice change. It's a nice change to do, and it was tough. Don't get me wrong to get there, but it was worth the climb. Well worth the climb. 100%. 100% all day long.
Absolutely. We have Randall in the chat saying, taking this cancer one day at a time. Randall, I am so grateful that you're still here and you can share your story as well. Randall, we've been following his journey since, pretty much the start of the podcast. He's physically disabled, and he was working himself to take multiple steps. And I think at one point he got up to like 12 steps a day, but then had a seizure and had a little bit of a setback. So he's been in the hospital fighting cancer recently. So my prayers go out to you, Randall. I hope that you can message me on Discord and we can catch up, buddy. But Mr. Gavin, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I really appreciate you sharing your message. This has been a great talk, and I'm just so happy to have you on.
Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I'm going to keep you over here, but I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go. So everybody, thank you for daydreaming with us. Is there any website that people can follow or Facebook page that people can follow to keep up with you?
Yeah, I'm on all the social media, Gavin, the identity coach, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. I'm on all of them. You can find me. Google, perfect. Anywhere.
All right, everybody, go ahead and check out those. Show him some love and support, and I will check you guys all out next week. Thank you for daydreaming.